on Hamid Aleph 5a. Third line.
From the top?
Third line from the top. Second word line. First word line is Gehenim.
Okay.
Okay. And like we said to Eric, very, very humbling day. Amarova, I'm sorry, Azhara Legatse Haruach, a warning to the haughty. Where can that be found? Minayin. Amarova, Rava says, Amar's Iri in the name of Iri, Shimu v'ha'azinu al tegbo. Listen here, don't be haughty. In other words, al over here means don't. In general, whenever the Torah uses the word al, it's a negative. So it's don't do this. Sometimes instead of the word using the word loy, it will say al. Rav Yitzchak says, from here, v'rom levavecha, you will become haughty, v'shachachta, and you will forget. Uksiv in the pasuk states, so in other words, you'll forget God. And the verse warns against forgetting God. Hishamar lecha, Hishamar is always a warning, is also a negative. Hishamar lecha, I warn you, pentishkach es Hashem lekecha, lest you forget Hashem your God. Like Rabbi Oven in the name of Rabbi Loi, the Amar of Oven Amar Rabbi Loi, Kol Makom Shenemar Hishamar Pen Va'al Eini Ela B'Loi to say. Whenever you see the words Hishamar Pen or Al, it's the equivalent of Loi, and it's a reference to a Loi to say a negative commandment. So we see from here that one should not be haughty. Dorish Rabbi Vira says Zimnin Amar La Mishmeder of Asi, Zimnin Amar La Mishmeder of Ami. Sometimes he said it in the name of Rabbi Asi, sometimes he said it in the name of Rabbi Ami. Any person who is haughty, eventually he'll become small. He will be humbled. Shenemar, as the pasuk states, Rumai, if he becomes haughty, he becomes Ray means prestigious. Then Ma'at, he's shrunk. He shrinks down to a smaller size. Maybe you'll think that he'll shrink, but he'll be a little bit smaller, but he'll still be around. That no, he'll be completely gone. If he repents and he acknowledges his sin of being too haughty, too proud, then he won't be. So in other words, if he stays haughty, he'll die early. But if he does tshuva, if he repents, then if he repents, he shall pass on in the right time, in his time he was supposed to die. Kavram Avinu, like Avram Avinu. Shenemar, as the verse continues, v'humchu, meaning if it becomes mach, if it becomes soft and he repents, then kol yikpaitzon. Like the people that the word kol is used to describe, which we'll explain in a moment, yikpaitzon, he'll pass on. So in other words, who is the word? Who does the word kol describe? Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Torah describes them using the words bakol, mikol, and kol. So if he humbles himself, then like the people using that the word kol is described, yikpaitzon, they'll pass on. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, that's bahu bakol, mikol, kol. Ve'im lav, but if he does not repent, u'kirosh shibolos yimolu, like the head of the stalk of barley, they'll fall down. What is the head, the top of the shibolos of the stalk? What does that mean? Rav Huna of Rav Chisda. This is a debate between Rav Huna and Rav Chisda. Chanamar, one of them says kisasa the shibilta, like the beards of the stalk. So every stalk of grain has a kernel. It's kernels on the stalk, and every kernel has sort of a beard that sticks out, a long piece that sticks out of each kernel. That's the beard. So the beard obviously falls off much earlier than the kernel itself. Chadamar one says like the kernels itself. Regardless, in either scenario, they're crushed pretty quickly. According to the opinion that says it's like the beard of the kernel. That's what the rosh shibolos means. Rosh shibolos means the head of the stalk. What's the head of the stalk? It's the long piece that comes out of the kernel. According to the opinion that says it's the kernels itself, why are the kernels called the rosh shibolos, the top of the shibolos of the stalk? Ravasi explained in the name of the students of Rishmol, an example is when a person goes into his field to cut down the stalks of wheat. So he cuts down the front stalks that appear to be the tallest. In other words, ones that are most in front of him. So in a certain sense, even the shibolos itself is called the tallest one. That's why it's called a rosh shibolos, because it's the first one in the field. Really, every group of stalks that are first in the field are the tall. They appear to be the tallest ones. Okay, the estaka ushva ruach. God rests with the humble and the soft. Rav Huna and Rav Chisda have a debate. Chadamar one says osi daka. That means the humble will actually become great. They'll become proud. They'll attain stature. The Chadamar one says no. It's the opposite. Anias daka. God goes and rests with the humble. He doesn't raise them up. Mustavar command Amr anias daka. It makes sense, like the opinion that says that God goes and finds the humble people. God abandoned all the mountains and all the hills, and he rested his Shekhinah upon a humble hill of Har Sinai. But he didn't take Har Sinai and make it into a big mountain. Evidently, God will rest amongst the humble. He doesn't lift them up. Amar of Yosef. A person should always learn from God's ways. God left all the mountains and all the tall, proud hills. And he rested his Shekhinah. His presence rested on Har Sinai, the mountain of Sinai, which obviously was a humble mountain. Additionally, when a God revealed himself to Moshe Rabbeinu, he did not reveal himself from inside a redwood, or a sequoia. He revealed himself from inside a thorn bush. Very, if anyone's, you go out to the eastern Oregon, you have these thorn bushes all over the place. These little bushes where they roll. It's very windy and they just roll onto the highway there. He is a very humble plant, and that's how he revealed himself to Moshe Rabbeinu. Amr Belazar, Kol Adam Sheyesh Begas Ruach Roy Legade Ka'ashera. Any person who's full of pride, it's appropriate to cut him down like an Asherah. Asherah is a tree that's worshipped. So pride obviously is, anyway, if you haven't realized it yet, pride here is one of the greatest sins. It's appropriate to cut him down like it's appropriate to cut down a tree of idol worship. Siv hachav roming hakayma geduim. 1 second. Roming hakayma geduim here is people that are proud. Geduim should be cut down. Siv hasam, and it says elsewhere of asherehem tigadeon. There are Asherah trees, in other words, trees that were used for idol worship, should also be cut down. Belazar taught, Kol Adam Sheyesh Begas Ruach Ein Aforin Inair. The person has too much pride. His dirt, in other words, the remains of his body will not wake up. In other words, God promises existence, that there will be a time of the resurrection, when the dead will come alive, which itself is a complicated subject. It's not just for it's a little more complicated than that. It's also questions why the resurrection is so fundamental. Why is it so critically important? What does it mean the dead will become alive? It means is that everything that died, everything that didn't fulfill its purpose, is going to live correctly. And that along with Mashiach is sort of going to be the answer to the question of the fact that the world doesn't appear to have succeeded in the vision that God wanted for it. Right? It doesn't take much to realize. You look around the world, it doesn't take much to realize that the world is not exactly living the way God created it to live. And the promise of Mashiach and the resurrection is that everything that died will live correctly. Okay. Anyway, so somebody who's proud, he will not be resurrected. Shenemar, as the verse states, "Kitzu v'radanu sheichne offer." Aroused and rejoiced those that rest in the ground. So what's the word here? Sheichne offer. Those that are sheichen. A sheichen is like a neighbor. Those that are neighbors to the ground, wake up, you'll be resurrected. Shichvi ba'offer le'nemer. It doesn't say those that lay in the ground, meaning the dead people. El sheichne offer, the neighbors to the ground. What does that mean? Mishnasa shochen la'offer b'chayav. Somebody who was humble, he became a neighbor to the ground. He kept himself low. In that case, those will be the ones to be awakened. But Amr of Elazar says, anyone who has, anyone who's full of haughtiness, the Shechina, God's presence, cries over him. Shenemar gvoya mimerchak yeda. The proud mimerchak yeda, God from a distance. Yeda over here means to cry. There's a few other examples. Yeda typically means to know, but it could also mean to cry. It's interesting. This would also be appropriate. We'll get to the Haggadah. We'll learn about Vayeda Lekim. God witnessed the Jewish people suffering in Egypt. Vayeda Lekim, and God knew. What exactly did he know? So some of the commentators explain that he remembered his promise, etc. Separate discussion. But it could be that one of the interpretations might be that God cried with them. The word Yeda could also be used as a word for crying. Yeah. Okay. Dorish Rabbi Vira. The Itema Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Vira said, in some say it was Rabbi Lazar that said, Boy Ra'eh, come and see, Shaloi Kemidas HaKadosh Baruch Hu Midas Basar V'Dam. The pathway of God is not like the pathway of men. Basar V'Dam, Gevaya Reyes, Gevaya Ve'en, Gevaya Reyes HaShafal. The important people, they have their important people conferences, right? We see that all the time. All the important people, they make these, they all get together to make themselves feel more important.
And we'll get together to decide how the rest of us are going to live.
Okay, that too. And the proud do not see the humble. But God's way is different. Hu gavaya, he is great. The roya is a shuffle, and he sees the humble. Shenemar ki rom Hashem, God is great. V'shafal yira, but he sees those that are humble. Amar of Chizd v'tim Mar Ukva. Rav Chizda says in the name of Mar Ukva, Kol Adam sheyesh b'gasis ruach, Amar, any person that's filled with pride, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, God says, Ein ani v'hu yechalon lader ba'olam. Me and him cannot live in the same world. Shenemar, Malshini b'seisei re'eu oisei atzmitz. Gevaya einayim v'rechav levav oisei leuchal. So let's read the second half of the verse here. Gevaya einayim, one whose eyes are haughty. Rechav levav, he thinks he has an expanded heart. He thinks of himself very highly. Oisei leuchal, him I can't stand. I can't be with him. I can't live in the same world as him. Some say I'm a saper lashon hara on those that speak gossip, because that's the first half of the verse. Shenemar malshine, those that gossip, beseser, in secret, re'eu, about their friend, oisei atzmis, them I will destroy. Okay, and this obviously from yesterday as well. The idea of pride and humility. Pride obviously is, in most religions, pride is a significant sin, and partially because it makes no room for God. Someone who's proud is in effect, it's a kind of idol worship. It's a worship of self, where he takes over all of existence, and he doesn't leave room for God to come in. Okay, Amr of Alexandri. Rav Alexandri said, "Kol adam sheyesh begas ruach, afilu ruach kima echrasa." Any person that's filled with pride, haughty, afilu ruach kima echrasa. Even a minor tragedy will throw him off kilter. And obviously, this is something you can see quite often in the news. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, "V'harasham," the wicked ones. Kiyam nigrosh, like the ocean, they will be swept away. Umayam sheyesh bekama revius ruach kima echrasei. So give me a second here. Okay, so the verse before this verse of Harsham Kiam Negrash is talking about the proud. The verse specifically indicates talking about those that are the verse talks about how God is together with those that are humble. And the next verse is the Risham, the wicked ones, meaning those that are not humble, those that are proud. Kiyam Nigrish, they'll be blown away like the ocean. Just like you go to an ocean or a lake, and it's filled with tremendous amount of water. Right, a revius is what? It's 4 or 5 ounces. You go to a lake, there's many more ounces. And then you see a wind come, even if it's a light, gentle breeze, and all of a sudden it ripples through the water. Man who only has one revius, we'll explain that in a moment. So certainly, if a wind comes, if a small tragedy strikes, it's able to throw these people off kilter. Okay. Now the idea is typically, obviously, a man is humankind requires quite a few revius to live, but it's often terminology. Hold on. Yeah. So the smallest person needs at least one revius to live. I guess it's an infant or something who needs 5 ounces of blood. And that's why the 5 ounce, whatever it is, 3 to 5 ounces of blood is what it takes for a person to be tamei. Okay. Amar of Chibarashi, Amar Rav. Rav Chibarashi says in the name of Rav, Talmud Chacham tzarich hebei echad mishmeine b'shminas. Talmud Chacham has to have an eighth of pride, 1/64. What exactly does that mean? You have take out your pride meter and plug in 1/64, and you'll find out. There's a lot of different explanations, but the point is,
if I could venture an idea,
sure.
The Chavis Chaim was about as humble as one could get, but when he had to put his foot down for the sake and the power of the office, so to speak, he didn't hesitate to do so.
Yeah, so that's sort of the idea that a Talmid Chacham has to be prepared to be firm. Yeah, absolutely. And the Gemara is an example. Omer of Huna Breder of Yeshua, the son of Rabbi Yeshua, says, it's sort of it crowns him like the stalk, like the tops of the kernels that are around the stalk of wheat. Okay. And the idea here is that he has to have a little bit of firmness so that people respect him and they don't push him over. Amar Rava says, "B'shamta isbei u'shamta delesbei." Somebody who has it should be in cherem, and somebody who doesn't have it should also be in cherem. In other words, any rabbi with pride should be excommunicated, but any rabbi without pride should also be excommunicated. So, in other words, what he's saying here is you have to have some very small amounts. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak disagrees, and he says, "Lo minah v'lo mitzasa." None of it, not even a small amount. Mizuter is it not enough? The Torah says, "Tayavas Hashem kol gvalev." Any person who has pride, God is repulsed by him, and therefore, according to Rav Nachman, one should not have any pride at all. Amar Chizki says, "Ein tefilasa shel adam nishmas, but imkein mesim libay kebasar." A person's prayer is not listened to unless he's humble. He's humble like basar. What does that mean? So meat is sort of soft. It's pliable. And if a person makes himself like that, he makes himself soft and pliable, and workable, then his prayers will be listened to. Shenamar, as the pasuk says, "V'haya midei chaydesh b'chadshay." It will be month every month. Yavei kol basar lehishtachvais. That the terminology used to describe a person here is basar, all the flesh. It means people. To bow down to God and to pray to Him. Evidently, it's those that whose activity is humble, like that of meat. Their prayers will be listened to by God. Amr of Zera Basar Ksibei. Oh, okay, okay, that's the first Gemara. Now, very interestingly, when the Torah talks about tsaras, the Torah talks about a person. So what's tsaras? Tsaras is the spiritual leprosy. right? And we said tsaras has different phases. First, you get locked up in a room for 7 days, and then you get excommunicated. You gotta leave the city, stay outside the city until it gets better, and then karbonos, you have to shave your head twice. Okay, the whole deal. Anyway, so who gets tsaras? A person, right? There's different types of tsaras. You could also get your clothes can get tsaras. A house can get tsaras. But when the Torah talks about tsaras of a person, so the Torah talks about it in two ways. Sometimes the verse states, Adam ki yeb or besarat se'es sapachas ebaharis, or Adam ki yeb tsaras. A man, if he will have tsaras. And sometimes the Torah uses the terminology as basar, if the flesh will have tsaras. Now, when the Torah talks about the tsaras healing, it gets better, it only says that in the context of tsaras that was described by the word basar. If the tsaras was described by the word adam, it does not talk about it healing. So the observation there is that if a person is humble, his tsaras will be healed. Person is haughty, and again, one of the reasons why tsaras comes for seven different reasons. God willing, I believe Tuesday after Pesach, we'll be talking about tsaras. Parshas Tisrael, we'll talk about tsaras Tuesday night. So if anyone wants to come, you're welcome to come. Okay, side points. Sponsored affiliate advertiser. Okay. Anyway, So the idea here is that a person is humble, his tsaras will be healed. If a person is proud, he will not get healed. Rav Zera says, "Basar ksibe v'nirpa." When the Torah describes tsaras using the word basar, and it appears in the flesh, then it says v'nirpa, it will be healed. But adam like ksibe v'nirpa. But it doesn't say that any man will be healed. Rav Yechon says the word adam is a it's a Rosh Tevis. It's the what do they call it in English? An acronym for Afer, Dam, and Mora. Afer is ash, Dam is blood, Mora is bile. That's the liquid that mediates between the gallbladder and the liver. Okay, and obviously the bile is not a pleasant liquid, although it's obviously necessary to live. I believe it's an enzyme. Okay, basar, flesh. What does that mean? Busha, srucha, rima. Busha is embarrassment. Srucha means it rots, and rima means it's filled with maggots. So obviously these words are both to keep one should remember that the meaning of his life, in some sense, is humility. Egedamri, some say that instead of sruch, so basar is beis, basar would be sin, right? So basar is beis, sin, resh. The sin is interchangeable with a samach, and that's why the word srucha or rotting, which starts with samach, is used. Others prefer sticking it with a shin or a sin directly. So they change it to sha'al or purgatory. Dechsiv b'shin. In other words, the ultimate place of one man's body is going to be to rot away, sha'el, to stay under the ground. Amar Ravashi, kol adam sheyesh b'gas ruach l'seif nifchas. Any person who's filled with pride, eventually he'll be humbled, right? As we can see in the world, past couple of years, I've seen a lot of very proud people be very humbled. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, "V'lasa eis, v'lasa pachas." Okay. The Torah talks about the different types of tsaras. One of them is called sa'es, and one of them is called sapachas. However, the ein sa'es el lashon gavoya. Sa'es could mean pride. Shenemar v'al kol hahorim haramim, on top of all the great mountains. V'al kol hagvoyes hanesuos, the proud hills. So you see here that nesuos is the word of sa'es, or pride. The ein sapachas el tfelo. Sapachas means secondary. Shenemar, this is a prophecy about the children of Eli HaKohen. You remember Chafni and Pinchas, we spoke about them a couple of times. They slept with the married woman. It doesn't mean they actually slept with the married woman, but they were pretty callous about being on time and being relied upon. No one was able to rely upon them, and because of that, many women who were becoming tahar remained. It took them much longer to become tahar because they knew they couldn't rely on the Kohanim. And the prophecy for the children of Eli was not a very pleasant one. It was dying early. And also, you'll be subjugated by other Kahanim Gedolim, and you'll be completely unworthy. So the children of Eli will have to go around and schnorr money. They'll have to go collect bread. So Sabchenina means here to be placed secondary. All right, if you remember the Gemara, I think Abaya was a grandson of Eli. He was concerned he might die young. We learned about him in Megillah. So the advice was he should study his Torah, he has a chance of living longer. Okay. Anyway, so we see here that the proud will be humbled. Amr Bishub and Levi. Bishub and Levi taught. Let's see how great the humble are in front of Hashem. If a person wants to bring a sacrifice, he wants to bring an oila. So what does he get a reward for bringing an oila? Like we saw, not that long ago, Mesechtes Nazar. If he brings a mincha, if he brings an offering of in effect flour and water, so schar mincha biyada, he gets the gift of bringing a mincha. But if one is humble, ma'ala olav hakosav ki'ilu hikriv kol hakarbonos kulam. The verse considers that as if he brought all the different sacrifices. Shenemar, as the verse states. It's interesting. Which verse is this in? It's in the Psalm 51. Psalm 51 is King David repenting after he sinned with Bathsheba. Okay, it's exactly what the sin is. Rabbinically, it's a discussion. Maybe it wasn't actually a sin to lay with her, but there was some sin at some level. That seems quite clear. And David HaMelech repented in Psalm 51. And one of the things he says is Shenemar, as the verse states, Zivche Elikim, the sacrifice to God. Zivche here is plural, so it's all the sacrifices to God are Ruach Neshbora, a broken heart. And not only that, his prayer is not disgusted, it's not despised. Shenemar, as the verse states, Leiv Nishbar V'nitka, a heart that's broken and humble. Elohim loy sivza, God will not embarrass it. God won't refrain from answering. Okay, we see here God respects the prayer of the humble. Amr Bishur ben Levi taught. Okay, the word, the operative word here is shum. Shum is an evaluation, like the Aramaic word shuma. This is just an introduction for the next Gemara. There's another similar word called sum. Sum means to place or to navigate. So we have shum and sum. Shum could also be shum here. It means evaluate. So Amr Shublevi, kol hasham or chaysav a person who evaluates his actions in this world, meaning he effectively tries to make sure to do as many mitzvahs and refrain from doing as many averos as he can. He will merit seeing the salvation of God. Shenemar, as the verse states. V'som derech, man who places his ways, enu b'yesha elohim, he will see the salvation of God. Al tikri v'som, he places, ela v'shom derech, he evaluates his ways. He evaluates the benefit of a mitzvah against the loss of an avera, and typically when he does that, he ends up doing a lot of mitzvahs and not a lot of averas. Okay, let's begin the next Gemara. Okay, we learned in the Mishnah about giving kinoi. Ketzah mekanala. How do you give the warning? So the Gemara asks, Hagu Fakasha. This in itself is difficult. Amr, the Mishnah says, Amr lo b'fnei shnayim al tadabri mishpleni. Don't speak with this man. That's the warning. Alma, evidently, dibur stirahu. That the dibur, 1 second. In other words, if the correct warning is don't speak, then that means that the bad thing to do is to speak. Let's go backwards here. A little cheating here first. What's the right way to do things? The right way to do things is don't seclude yourself with another man. And the bad thing to do is secluding yourself with another man. That's the right way to do it. So the kina is seclusion, and the bad thing to do is seclusion. if you warn her, let's say, not to do something else, which is not seclusion, the warning is not valid. Now the Mishnah says if you warn her not to talk, evidently talking is the problem. So if she speaks, then that will not fulfill the obligation that will not fulfill the obligation. One second, sorry, backwards. Which was what to say. Yeah, the Mishnah says the warning is don't speak. Evidently, the bad thing to do is to speak. Alma dibur stirahu. That speaking is going to be the prohibited act of stira. But then the Mishnah continues and says, "V'hadotani dibur imai." If she spoke, adayim mutaras lebesim mutaras lecha b'truma, that does not qualify as stira. Alma dibur lav klumhu, leklumhu. Evidently, speaking is nothing, zero. In other words, because the warning has to be for stira, which is seclusion, yichud, not speech. Rabbi explained Hachikamer. This is what we meant to do, what we meant to say. If he warns her al tadabri, don't speak. V'dibra, and she went ahead and spoke with the guy. Or alternatively, even if he says to her al tadabri, don't speak with this philanderer, v'nistera, and she went ahead and she secluded herself with him. Still, or altisteri v'dibra. He says, don't seclude yourself with this man, v'dibra imai, and then she went ahead and spoke with him publicly. In all these cases, adayin mutaras lebesim mutaras lecha b'truma. In all these scenarios, that this is not a valid kinui. It's not a valid warning. The only way to have a valid warning is if you warn her, don't be in seclusion, and then nichnasa ima the base seiser, they went into seclusion. So at that point, we treat her as a very likely candidate for adultery, and therefore, and probably for divorce, and therefore she loses a lot of the privileges of being married. She can no longer be intimate with her husband, and she cannot eat truma because of that. If her husband was a kain. Okay. Begin the next Gemara. Again, so now she's a suffix Sotah now, right? She's certified Sotah, meaning that we don't know whether or not she was adulterous, but we do know that she disobeyed a warning and she secluded herself. So she has to sort of discover. She has to go through the discovery process to figure out whether or not she's a Sotah. At that point in time, if she was an adulteress, let's say we have witnesses that say she committed adultery, so then she does not drink the waters of Sotah. What happens is she is prohibited to be with her husband, and she must get divorced. And therefore, as long as we haven't clarified the question, meaning as long as we haven't figured out whether she's certainly a Sotah or not, we treat her as if she's certainly a Sotah. And that means because she's prohibited to her husband, therefore, if she dies, the brothers of the husband can do chalitza and not yibam, presuming that they don't have any children. What's wrong with doing yibam? Rav Yosef explains, the verse states, so we're talking about a woman here who was divorced because of adultery. And it says she will go and be to another man. Once she's suspected, and this is not just a suspicion, we're talking suspicion of adultery here means kinoi and stira with witnesses, or it means actual witnesses of adultery. Now, 1 second. So then she's to another man, but she's not to a yavam. Abaya says, if that's the case, she can't marry the brothers, she shouldn't require chalitza either. So he responded, if the husband was still alive, she would require a divorce, even though the husband's prohibited to her. Let's say, for example, we have a woman she's prohibited to her husband because we know she's adulterous. Absolutely certain. Kina and Stira, and we have witnesses that saw that she was with another man. She still requires a divorce. In other words, even though she's prohibited to her husband, the husband still needs to divorce her. And therefore, hashtanami tibai chalitza, and therefore she still needs chalitza to be let loose from the brothers, as it were. Okay. Let's see the next. There's three more versions of the same Gemara. Ista Amri, another version of this Gemara. Amar Rav Yosef says, Torah says she, talking about a woman who was adulterous, she leaves the house and shall be to another man. So that she doesn't destroy her house with her adultery. And now you're suggesting to Siyabnam and Yivumi that she should do Yibum. She already broke one house. Now you want her to break another house? Abaya says if that's the case, if you're so concerned with the fact that she was adulterous, that she is going to destroy houses, and you shouldn't let her marry somebody else. Rav Yosef responded, there's no comparison. Are we forcing the new husband to marry her? No. But in Yibum, there is a compulsion. There is a compulsory aspect. Yibum happens without anyone's will. And therefore, it makes sense that she would not be eligible for Yibum. Okay, stop there. We'll continue two more versions tomorrow. I believe Rabbi Spidak will be giving the share tomorrow, and Ari will be giving the share on Wednesday, taking over for about 2 weeks. Ari Steinberg. Aryeh Steinberg. Aryeh Steinberg will be taking over. Thank you. So thank you, Jules, for making the connection. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for coming last night. Yes, yesterday.
It was very nice.
Pleasure. And
Thank you for yesterday. Thank you for all the dots.
Pleasure.
A quick reflection, Rabbi, before we got the Kollel, before your pack roared into town, this was a place to be. When I first moved here after my wife and I got married, and